I want you to picture something. You walk into a dealership on a Saturday afternoon. You've been thinking about replacing your old gasoline car for months. Gas prices feel unpredictable. Maintenance keeps creeping higher. And everywhere you look, people are talking about electric vehicles. Cleaner, cheaper to run, the future of transportation. The salesperson greets you with the same line thousands of buyers hear every day. Electric cars save you money in the long run. You glance at the vehicle sitting in the showroom. It's sleek, minimalist, almost silent. A large touchscreen replaces most of the buttons you're used to. The dashboard feels less like a car and more like a smartphone on wheels. You take a test drive. The acceleration is instant. The ride is smooth. No engine noise, no gear shifts, just quiet power. By the time you return to the dealership parking lot, you're already imagining what it would be like to own it. Then the numbers appear. $52,000 for the vehicle. But don't worry, the salesperson says. You'll save money on gas. You'll save money on maintenance. And there are government incentives that make it even more affordable. You start doing the math. Maybe this is actually the smarter financial choice. After all, millions of people are making the same decision. Electric vehicles are no longer a niche product. In 2023 alone, more than 1.4 million EVs were sold in the United States, representing nearly 10% of all new car sales. Around the world, governments are pushing electric vehicles as the solution to both climate change and rising fuel costs. Automakers are investing hundreds of billions of dollars to electrify their fleets, and consumers are being told that switching to electric isn't just good for the planet, it's good for their wallets. But there's a problem. The financial story behind electric vehicles is far more complicated than the marketing suggests. For many households, the shift to electric cars is quietly creating a new kind of financial pressure, one that doesn't appear immediately when the car is purchased. It appears slowly, over years, in monthly payments, insurance premiums, depreciation losses, battery concerns, and charging infrastructure costs that few buyers fully calculate before signing the paperwork. The result is something economists sometimes call a technology adoption trap. A product that promises long-term savings ends up locking consumers into higher long-term spending, and the numbers behind electric vehicles are beginning to reveal that reality. Let's start with the purchase price. The average new car in the United States currently costs around $48,000, but the average electric vehicle costs significantly more. The average EV transaction price in recent years has hovered around $53,000 to $55,000. That difference might not sound dramatic at first, but when most vehicles are financed over 60 to 72 months, even a $7,000 price gap can translate into hundreds of dollars in additional monthly payments. And that's before we account for interest. A buyer financing a $55,000 electric vehicle at modern interest rates can easily face a monthly payment of $800 to $1,000 per month, depending on the loan terms. Suddenly, the promise of saving money on gas begins to compete with a much larger financial reality, the cost of owning the car itself. But the purchase price is only the first layer of the electric car equation. The real financial story begins after the car leaves the dealership, because owning an electric vehicle changes not just how you drive, but how you spend money on transportation. Charging at home requires installing equipment many homeowners don't already have. Charging in public can cost far more than people expect. Insurance premiums for EVs tend to be significantly higher due to expensive battery components and complex repair requirements. And perhaps most importantly, electric vehicles introduce a new financial variable that gasoline cars never had to worry about: battery longevity. A gasoline engine can run for 200,000 miles with proper maintenance. But the battery in an electric vehicle represents a single component that can cost $10,000 to $20,000 to replace if it fails outside warranty. According to an analysis, battery replacement costs remain one of the largest long-term financial uncertainties for EV owners. And while manufacturers provide warranties that often last 8 years or 100,000 miles, the long-term durability of batteries beyond that window is still being studied. This creates a subtle psychological pressure on owners. Unlike a traditional car, Where most mechanical issues can be repaired individually, the battery in an EV represents a massive single-point expense, a ticking financial variable that quietly influences resale values, insurance rates, and long-term ownership costs. Which brings us to a question that more economists and analysts are beginning to ask. If electric vehicles are supposed to save consumers money, why are so many owners finding that the financial reality feels heavier than expected? To understand that, we need to look at the hidden costs that almost never appear in advertisements or showroom conversations. Because the real electric car trap doesn't begin with the purchase. It begins with everything that comes after it. The real financial story of electric vehicles doesn't begin when you buy the car. It begins when you try to live with it. Because the monthly payment is only the first layer of EV ownership. Beneath it sits a series of smaller costs, some predictable, some hidden, that slowly reshape the economics of owning the car. None of them sound dramatic on their own, but together, they quietly change the financial equation. Let's start with the cost most buyers underestimate first: charging. At first glance, charging an electric car sounds simple. Plug it in at home, wake up to a full battery. In theory, it's cheaper than gasoline. But the reality depends heavily on where and how you charge. For homeowners, installing a proper Level 2 charging system often becomes necessary. A standard wall outlet can take more than a day to fully charge many EV batteries. Faster charging requires specialized equipment, and that equipment isn't free. Home charging stations typically cost between $350 and $2,000, while installation can range anywhere from $1,000 to $5,000 depending on electrical upgrades required. In older homes, upgrading the electrical panel alone can cost several $1,000s. This means the cheap fuel advantage often begins with a four-figure upfront investment. Many buyers never considered when calculating the price of their vehicle. But the charging story doesn't end there, because many EV owners don't charge exclusively at home. Public charging stations, especially fast chargers, often cost significantly more than residential electricity. In some regions, fast charging can cost 2 to 3 times the price of home charging, especially during peak demand hours. What was supposed to feel like cheap electricity can start to resemble gasoline prices again. And charging introduces something gasoline cars never had to consider: time. Filling a gasoline car typically takes 5 minutes. Charging an EV can take anywhere from 30 minutes on a fast charger to several hours on slower stations. Even home Level 2 charging usually requires 6-12 hours for a full charge. For most owners, that time is absorbed into daily life, but it still shapes behavior. Long road trips require planning around charging infrastructure. Detours become part of the route. Waiting becomes part of the routine. In economics, this is sometimes called a time cost, a resource consumers spend even when money isn't directly leaving their wallets. Then there's insurance. Electric vehicles contain extremely expensive components, especially their battery systems. Repairs often require specialized technicians and manufacturer-specific parts. As a result, EV insurance premiums tend to run higher than comparable gasoline vehicles. Analysis comparing ownership costs shows EVs frequently carry higher insurance costs and ownership expenses, even when fuel savings are considered. And when repairs are needed, the costs can be surprisingly steep. Electric vehicles do have fewer moving mechanical parts than gasoline cars. There's no oil to change, no transmission fluid, no exhaust system. But when something does break, the repair often involves complex electronic systems or large battery components, and those repairs are rarely cheap. The largest single expense in an EV remains the battery itself. Most manufacturers provide battery warranties that last about 8 years or 100,000 miles. After that window, the financial responsibility shifts to the owner. Battery replacement costs vary dramatically depending on the vehicle model. According to real-world estimates compiled in EV ownership research, replacement costs can range from $5,000 to over $20,000, depending on the size and brand of the battery pack. That doesn't mean every EV owner will face a battery replacement. Many vehicles are sold or traded long before that moment arrives. But the possibility itself creates a ripple effect throughout the EV market, because resale values depend heavily on how buyers perceive that future risk. And resale values introduce another hidden financial force behind electric vehicles: depreciation. Vehicles lose value over time. That's normal. But electric vehicles have experienced unusually steep depreciation in recent years. Rapid technological improvements mean newer models often offer better range, faster charging, and improved batteries, which makes older models feel outdated faster than traditional gasoline cars. The used EV market has already begun reflecting this dynamic. Prices for used electric vehicles fell about 32% in a single year, significantly faster than gasoline vehicles, according to reporting on the used EV market shift. For the original owner, that depreciation represents thousands of dollars in lost value. And depreciation matters more than most people realize. Because over the life of a car, depreciation is often the single largest cost of ownership, exceeding fuel, maintenance, and insurance combined. Which brings us to the deeper financial reality of electric vehicles. The promise of EVs has always been built around a simple idea. You pay more upfront, but you save money later. Sometimes that promise holds true. But sometimes the savings never fully catch up with the costs, especially when the purchase price, insurance, charging infrastructure, and depreciation are all added together. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If electric vehicles are supposed to be cheaper to own over time, why do so many EV owners still feel financially stretched after buying one? To answer that, we need to examine the most powerful financial force shaping EV ownership. Not electricity, not maintenance, but financing, depreciation, and the economic psychology behind modern car ownership. Because the real electric car trap isn't about energy, it's about debt. The most powerful cost of owning a car isn't fuel. It isn't maintenance. It isn't insurance. The largest cost of owning almost any vehicle is something far less visible: depreciation. Depreciation is the silent financial force that determines whether a car becomes an affordable tool or an expensive liability. The moment you drive a new car off the dealership lot, its value begins to fall. That's normal. But the speed at which electric vehicles lose value has surprised even industry analysts. Recent market studies show that electric vehicles lose nearly 30% more value over time than gasoline cars. In fact, a 2025 analysis found EVs lose about 58.8% of their value within 5 years, compared with 45.6% for the average vehicle. That difference might not sound dramatic at first, but when the starting price of many EVs exceeds $50,000, the financial impact becomes enormous. A car that loses nearly 60% of its value means that a $50,000 vehicle may be worth barely $20,000 after 5 years. For owners who finance that purchase, this creates a dangerous financial situation. Because loans don't depreciate, cars do. If the car loses value faster than the loan balance falls, the owner becomes underwater on the loan, owing more money than the car itself is worth. And this scenario has quietly become common in the modern car market. Today, about 80% of new cars are financed, and the average monthly car payment has climbed to around $748 per month, reflecting the rising cost of vehicles and longer loan terms. Electric vehicles amplify this dynamic because they combine high purchase prices with rapid technological change. Unlike gasoline cars, EV technology evolves quickly. Each year brings longer battery range, faster charging speeds, improved software systems, new battery chemistry. This rapid innovation means newer models often make previous versions feel outdated far more quickly than traditional vehicles. And when newer technology enters the market, older models lose value faster. Used EV prices have already shown dramatic swings. Market studies tracking millions of used car listings found that used EV prices dropped by roughly 30 to 40% in a single year, while gasoline vehicles fell only 3 to 7% during the same period. For the first owner, that drop represents thousands of dollars in lost equity. For the second owner, it can look like a bargain, but depreciation is only part of the financial trap. The deeper mechanism is how modern car financing interacts with that depreciation. Most buyers no longer purchase vehicles outright. They finance them. And financing quietly transforms cars from products into long-term financial commitments. Consider a typical EV purchase. A buyer finances a $55,000 vehicle over 72 months. The monthly payment might land somewhere between $800 and $900, depending on interest rates and the down payment. For the first 2 or 3 years, most of that payment goes toward interest rather than the loan principal. Meanwhile, the car's value is falling rapidly. By year 3, the vehicle might have lost half of its original value, but the owner may still owe tens of thousands of dollars on the loan. At that moment, selling the car becomes extremely difficult. Trading it in often requires rolling negative equity into another loan, which means the next car becomes even more expensive. This cycle is one of the reasons economists describe modern car ownership as a debt treadmill, and electric vehicles can accelerate that treadmill. There's another factor quietly influencing this dynamic: government incentives. Many countries provide tax credits or rebates to encourage EV adoption. These incentives lower the effective price of new electric vehicles, but they unintentionally create a side effect. They lower the resale value of used EVs. If a new electric car receives a $7,500 tax credit, a used version of that car must sell for significantly less to remain competitive. Over time, this pushes used EV prices downward. That's one reason analysts have observed dramatic drops in resale values across several popular models. Vehicles like the Tesla Model 3, Nissan Leaf, and Hyundai Kona Electric have seen substantial price declines in the used market in recent years as supply increased and new models improved. None of this means electric vehicles are inherently bad products. They offer clear advantages: lower fuel cost, lower routine maintenance, quieter operation, and lower emissions. But financially, the story is more complicated than the marketing suggests, because the real economics of car ownership are rarely about the sticker price alone. They're about the entire life cycle of the vehicle: purchase price, financing, depreciation, insurance, infrastructure, and resale value. When those factors combine, the result can be surprising. Many EV owners don't feel poor because electricity is expensive. They feel financially stretched because the vehicle itself has become the largest monthly expense in their budget. And that leads to the deeper question behind the electric car trap. If electric vehicles are supposed to represent the future of transportation, who is actually benefiting most from this transition? Consumers? Or the industries building the vehicles? Because when you step back and look at the entire system, automakers, governments, lenders, and energy companies, a different economic picture begins to emerge. And understanding that picture explains why the electric vehicle boom may be reshaping the finances of millions of households, not always in the way they expected. Electric vehicles are not just about clean energy or lower fuel costs. They're a financial ecosystem carefully engineered for predictable outcomes for automakers, lenders, and policymakers. Every aspect of EV ownership, from the high upfront price to charging infrastructure to insurance to depreciation, quietly adds layers of costs that rarely appear in glossy advertisements. Monthly payments, rapid depreciation, and hidden repair costs combine to create a long-term financial drag. Many owners believe they're saving on fuel, but the reality is that their car often becomes the largest line item in their monthly budget. It's not that electric vehicles are inherently bad. They represent innovation, sustainability, and the promise of a cleaner future. But that promise comes at a price, one that isn't always fully understood. Awareness is the only way to avoid becoming trapped. Consumers must calculate the total cost of ownership, plan for depreciation, and avoid rolling negative equity into new loans. Small choices, delaying upgrades, buying used instead of new, or carefully planning financing can mean the difference between empowerment and financial strain. In the end, the electric car trap isn't about electricity. It's about awareness, planning, and intentional financial decisions. Without them, a car designed to save money can quietly drain your wallet.